Zixthara pressed her four-fingered hand against the cool metal of the observation deck window. Through the transparent barrier, she watched the strange vessel approach their flagship. The ship looked wrong to her eyes. Where Kethvar vessels were sleek and efficient, this human craft seemed bulky and inefficient. It had unnecessary curves and what appeared to be decorative elements that served no tactical purpose. She tilted her elongated head and studied the approaching vessel with her large black eyes. As the lead military strategist for the Galactic Hegemony's First Contact Division, Zixthara had encountered 17 different species during their expansion across the galaxy. Each time the pattern was the same. First contact, evaluation of military capabilities, then either integration into the hegemony or elimination. The humans would be no different, or so she thought. Strategist Zixthara, came a voice behind her. She turned to see Commander Vorth approaching. His scales shifted from blue to purple, indicating mild concern. The humans have sent a transmission. They request a formal meeting. Of course they do, Zixthara replied, her voice carrying the typical Kethvar tone of logical certainty. They wish to negotiate their surrender before we demonstrate our superiority. It is efficient, but Commander Vorth's scales remained purple. They did not mention surrender. They spoke of establishing diplomatic relations and discussing something they called rules of engagement. Zixthara's head tilted further. Rules of engagement? The phrase made no sense to her analytical mind. Engagement meant combat. Combat had only one rule: win by any means necessary. What other rules could there be? Send me their military data, she ordered. I will analyze their capabilities before the meeting. 3 hours later, Zixthara sat in her quarters, staring at the data streams flowing across her holographic display. Her mind, trained since birth to process military information with cold efficiency, struggled to understand what she was seeing. The humans had something they called Geneva Conventions. As she read through the translated documents, her large eyes widened. These were rules that humans followed during warfare. Not rules imposed by conquerors on the defeated, but rules they imposed on themselves. She read the first convention slowly. The wounded and sick shall be collected and cared for. Zixthara paused. This made no sense. Wounded enemies were liabilities. The logical action was to leave them to die or eliminate them quickly. Why would humans waste resources caring for defeated foes? The second convention was worse. Prisoners of war must be treated humanely. Zixthara's mind reeled. Prisoners were sources of information. They should be interrogated efficiently and then disposed of. The human rules forbade torture, demanded proper food and shelter, and even required medical care for captured enemies. She continued reading, her confusion growing with each line. Humans had rules about protecting civilians during war. They had rules about which weapons they could use. They had rules about how to treat captured soldiers, how to handle surrenders, and how to conduct sieges. This cannot be correct, she whispered to herself. She checked the translation algorithms 3 times. The data was accurate. Zixthara leaned back in her chair, her mind working furiously. Throughout the galaxy, warfare followed simple principles. Use maximum force to achieve victory with minimum cost. Eliminate threats completely. Show no mercy to prevent future resistance. These principles had allowed the Kethvar to conquer system after system, but humans apparently threw away every advantage they could gain. They deliberately handicapped themselves with rules that served no logical purpose. It was like fighting with one arm tied behind their back while blindfolded. She pulled up the human military history files. If these rules were real, human civilization should have collapsed long ago. Any species that fought inefficiently would be conquered by those who fought with pure logic. But the data showed something impossible. Humans had fought hundreds of wars against each other over thousands of years. They had faced extinction-level threats multiple times, yet somehow they had not only survived but thrived. Their population had grown from millions to billions. They had developed technology advanced enough for interstellar travel. How could such an inefficient military philosophy produce success? Zixthara dug deeper into the historical records. She found accounts of human battles where smaller forces had defeated larger ones. She found records of human soldiers who had died protecting civilians. She found stories of human commanders who had refused to use certain weapons because they were too cruel. Each piece of information was another puzzle piece that refused to fit into her understanding of warfare. Her head began to ache, a rare occurrence for a Kethvar. Their minds were designed to process complex tactical information without strain. But this human data seemed to actively resist logical analysis. She decided to focus on specific examples. Perhaps individual cases would make more sense than the broad principles. The first case file she opened detailed something called the Christmas Truce. During a major human war, opposing soldiers had spontaneously stopped fighting for one day. They had left their trenches, shared food, and even played games together. Then the next day they had returned to trying to kill each other. Zixthera stared at the file for a full minute before closing it. The behavior described was so illogical that she wondered if the translation was corrupted. The second file was about human medics during combat. These medics wore special markings that identified them as non-combatants. Even more strange, enemy forces were expected to respect these markings and not attack the medics. In return, human medics would treat wounded enemies alongside their own soldiers. Impossible, Zixthera muttered. Combat medics should be primary targets. Eliminating enemy medical support would weaken their fighting capacity. But humans had somehow convinced themselves and their enemies that medical personnel were off limits. The third file broke her understanding completely. It described human rules of engagement that changed based on the situation. In some conflicts, human soldiers were forbidden from firing unless fired upon first. In others, they had to verify that targets were legitimate combatants before attacking. Some human military operations required soldiers to risk their own lives to minimize civilian casualties. Zixthera stood up abruptly, her chair sliding backward. She began pacing her quarters, her mind racing. Every military principle she had ever learned told her that these humans should be easy targets. They had voluntarily eliminated half their tactical options. They cared more about abstract concepts like honor and mercy than about winning. Yet something nagged at her analytical mind. The humans had achieved interstellar flight. They had unified their planet under a single government. Their technology was comparable to hegemony standards. These were not the achievements of a weak, inefficient species. She returned to her desk and opened a new file. This one contained recent intelligence about human military capabilities. The data showed advanced weapons, sophisticated strategies, and disciplined forces. But overlaying everything were those impossible rules. Humans had weapons capable of destroying entire cities, but they had treaties limiting when such weapons could be used. They had biological weapons that could devastate populations, but they had banned their own use of such tools. They had developed new forms of warfare, then immediately created new rules to govern them. They fight with both hands tied behind their backs, Zixthera said aloud. Yet somehow they have never lost a war when truly threatened. She sat down again, her large eyes fixed on the data. Tomorrow she would meet these humans face to face. She would observe their representatives and try to understand how beings capable of such advanced thinking could embrace such obvious tactical disadvantages. But already, deep in her logical mind, something was beginning to crack. The human military philosophy was not just inefficient, it was actively self-destructive. No rational species should have survived using such methods. The fact that humans had not only survived but prospered suggested something that Zixthera's mind refused to accept. Perhaps logic itself was not the ultimate tool for military success. The thought was so disturbing that she quickly pushed it away. Tomorrow's meeting would provide answers. It had to. The meeting room aboard the Hegemony flagship was designed to project power. The walls were made of polished black metal, and the lighting was carefully arranged to cast the Hegemony delegates in an imposing light, while leaving visiting species in subtle shadow. Zixthera had seen this room intimidate dozens of alien representatives, but Admiral Sarah Chen walked in as if she owned the space. The human was smaller than most hegemony species. With pale skin and short brown hair, she wore a dark blue uniform with colorful patches and metal insignia. What struck Zixthera immediately was the woman's posture. Admiral Chen stood straight but relaxed, her hands clasped behind her back. Her face showed no fear, no aggression, just calm attention. "Welcome aboard," Commander Vorth said in Galactic Standard. His translator device gave his words a formal tone. "I am Commander Vorth, representing the Galactic Hegemony. This is Strategist Zixthera, our military analyst." Admiral Chen nodded to each of them. "Admiral Sarah Chen, representing the United Earth Government. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting." She spoke without any translation device. Zixithera realized the human had learned Galactic Standard. This suggested either exceptional intelligence or considerable preparation time. Both possibilities were concerning. "Please sit," Commander Vorth gestured to the chair across from them. Admiral Chen sat down with fluid grace, placing a small device on the table. "Before we begin," Admiral Chen said, "I want to establish our rules of engagement for these negotiations." There was that phrase again. Zixithera leaned forward slightly. "Rules of engagement? This is a diplomatic meeting, not a battle." Admiral Chen smiled. The expression seemed genuine, reaching her eyes. "In human culture, Admiral, we believe that how we conduct ourselves in any interaction matters. Even in negotiations, we follow certain principles." "What principles?" Commander Vorth asked, his scales shifting to a curious green. "First, we commit to honest communication. We will not lie to you, and we hope you will extend the same courtesy. Second, we will respect each other's right to refuse any agreement. Third, we will work towards solutions that benefit all parties involved." Zixithera's head tilted. "You are establishing rules that limit your own negotiating power." "This is illogical, is it?" Admiral Chen asked. "In our experience, negotiations based on mutual respect and honesty produce better long-term results than those based on deception or coercion." "But you are volunteering to handicap yourself," Zixithera insisted. "You could lie to gain advantage. You could make threats to force agreement. Instead, you choose to restrict your options." Admiral Chen nodded. "Yes, we do. Because we've learned that short-term advantages gained through deception usually create long-term problems." Zixithera felt that strange mental strain again. The human was describing a negotiation strategy that deliberately threw away useful tools. Yet Admiral Chen seemed confident and competent, not weak or naive. Commander Vorth spoke up. "Let us discuss military matters. Our intelligence indicates that your species has something called laws of war. Please explain these." Admiral Chen's expression became more serious. "Certainly. Over the course of human history, we developed international laws governing the conduct of warfare. These laws are designed to limit suffering and protect those who cannot defend themselves." "You mean civilians?" Zixithera said. "Civilians, yes, but also wounded soldiers, prisoners of war, and non-combatants like medical personnel and chaplains." Zixithera's large eyes narrowed. "You protect your enemies when they are vulnerable. This seems tactically unsound, does it?" Admiral Chen asked. She touched her device and a holographic display appeared above the table. "Let me show you something." The display showed a battlefield scene. Human soldiers in green uniforms were advancing through a damaged city. Zixithera watched as the soldiers moved carefully from building to building, clearly following specific procedures. "This is footage from a recent conflict on one of our colony worlds," Admiral Chen explained. "Watch how our soldiers behave." In the display, a group of human soldiers encountered wounded enemy fighters. Instead of finishing them off, the humans provided medical aid. They bandaged wounds, gave water, and called for medics. One human soldier even shared his food rations with a captured enemy. "This is inefficient," Zixithera said, but her voice lacked its usual certainty. "Those resources could be used to support your own forces." "Could they?" Admiral Chen asked. "Watch what happens next." The scene shifted to show the same soldiers entering a new area of the city. Civilians emerged from hiding places, pointing toward enemy positions and offering information. Children ran to the soldiers and elderly humans offered them water and food. "The civilians trust us," Admiral Chen explained. "They help us because they know we will protect them. They share intelligence because they've seen how we treat prisoners. Our adherence to the laws of war isn't a weakness. It's a force multiplier." Zixithera stared at the display. The human argument made no logical sense, yet the evidence was right in front of her eyes. The civilians were actively assisting the human military forces. "Show me more," she demanded. Admiral Chen changed the display. This time it showed a prisoner exchange. Human soldiers were returning captured enemies while receiving their own people back. But Zixithera noticed something strange. The returned human prisoners looked healthy and well-fed. More importantly, they moved with confidence and discipline. "Your soldiers do not break under interrogation," Zixithera observed. "Rarely," Admiral Chen confirmed. "When our soldiers know that they will be treated humanely if captured, they fight harder. When they know their own people follow strict ethical codes, they trust their officers completely. This trust creates unit cohesion that cannot be achieved through fear alone." The display changed again. This time it showed human soldiers in a defensive position. They were vastly outnumbered by attacking forces, but they held their ground with remarkable determination. Even when the position seemed hopeless, they continued fighting with disciplined teamwork. Why do they not retreat? Commander Vorth asked. Because they trust each other completely, Admiral Chen replied. Each soldier knows that their comrades will follow the same ethical code. No one will abandon their post. No one will sacrifice others to save themselves. This mutual trust allows small units to achieve what should be impossible. Zixthera felt her mental strain increasing. The human was describing a military system where self-imposed limitations created advantages. It was like saying that cutting off your own arm made you stronger. This cannot work against truly ruthless enemies, she said. Species that show no mercy, that use every available weapon, that fight with pure logic. Admiral Chen's expression became grave. We've faced such enemies before. In our own history, we fought against those who rejected all moral constraints. We called them by many names: fascists, war criminals, genocidal regimes. And, Zixthera prompted, we defeated them. Every time. The room fell silent. Zixthera stared at the human admiral, trying to process this information. According to every military principle she knew, forces that abandoned moral constraints should have significant advantages over those that maintained them. How? She finally asked. Because soldiers who fight for principles fight harder than soldiers who fight only for victory, Admiral Chen replied. Because populations that trust their military provide more support than populations that fear them. Because allies who believe in your cause are more reliable than allies who only fear your power. Admiral Chen stood up. Strategist Zixthera, you seem troubled by our approach to warfare. May I ask why? Zixthera realized she had been unconsciously making small stress movements with her hands. She forced herself to stop. Your methods appear to be deliberately inefficient, yet your results suggest effectiveness. This creates a logical contradiction that I cannot resolve. Perhaps, Admiral Chen said gently, the contradiction exists because your definition of efficiency is incomplete. After the humans left, Zixthera sat alone in the meeting room. Her mind was racing, trying to find some flaw in the human arguments. But every piece of evidence supported their impossible claims. Humans handicapped themselves with rules and somehow became stronger. They showed mercy to enemies and gained advantages. They protected the weak and increased their own power. It made no sense. Yet it seemed to work. For the first time in her life, Zixthera began to doubt the fundamental principles of logical warfare. The doubt was small, barely noticeable, but it was there and it was growing. 3 weeks after the diplomatic meeting, the Hegemony Council decided to test human resolve. The target was New Geneva, a small human colony on the edge of their territory. The official reason was a border dispute. The real reason was to see how humans fought when their strange rules were challenged by overwhelming force. Zixthera stood on the bridge of the Hegemony Dreadnought. Logical conclusion. Watching the tactical displays. The human colony had only basic defenses and a small garrison. The Hegemony force included 3 heavy cruisers, 12 destroyers, and 2 full infantry divisions. It should have been an easy victory. Human vessels approaching, reported the sensor operator. 2 frigates and 1 light cruiser. Commander Vorth looked at the display with satisfaction. 3 ships against 17. They will surrender quickly when they understand the odds. But Zixthera felt uneasy. She had spent the past 3 weeks studying human military history. Humans had a disturbing tendency to fight impossible battles and somehow win. Sir, the communications officer reported, the human ships are transmitting. Put it through, Vorth ordered. The voice that came through the speakers was calm and professional. Hegemony vessels, this is Captain Martinez of the UEG Defender. You are approaching human territory with hostile intent. Please state your purpose. This is Commander Vorth of the Galactic Hegemony. We claim this system under right of conquest. Surrender immediately and your lives will be spared. There was a brief pause. Then Captain Martinez replied, Commander, we cannot surrender a civilian colony to hostile forces. We are prepared to defend New Geneva. I strongly advise you to reconsider your course of action. Zixthera studied the tactical display. 3 human ships against 17 Hegemony vessels. The humans had to know they could not win, yet they showed no sign of retreating. Your choice, Commander Vorth said. Begin the attack. What followed was unlike any battle Zixathara had ever witnessed. The human ships moved with precise coordination, using the planet's gravity well and asteroid field to maximum advantage. They fired with surgical accuracy, targeting weapon systems and engines instead of trying to destroy enemy ships outright. Most importantly, they transmitted warnings before each attack. Hegemony vessel Sharp Logic, you have civilians aboard. Evacuate your forward sections before we target your weapons array. Destroyer Swift Calculation, your life support systems will be damaged in 30 seconds. Move your crew to safe areas. Zixathara watched in amazement as the humans announced their attacks in advance, giving enemy crews time to protect themselves. It was the most inefficient combat tactic she had ever seen. Yet somehow, it was working. The hegemony ships, designed for maximum firepower and logical targeting, found themselves constantly reacting to human moves instead of executing their own plans. The humans fought like they were conducting a careful surgical operation rather than a battle. "Sir," the tactical officer reported, "the Sharp Logic is requesting assistance. Their weapons are offline and their engines are disabled, but they report minimal casualties." Commander Vorth's scales shifted to confused yellow. Minimal casualties? They took direct hits. The humans targeted non-vital systems first, Zixathara realized. They disabled the ship without killing the crew. As the battle continued, something even stranger happened. The disabled hegemony vessels began receiving transmissions from the humans. "Hegemony ship Sharp Logic, this is Captain Martinez. We're transmitting medical assistance protocols to help with your wounded. Do you need emergency evacuation for critical cases?" Vorth stared at the communications display. "They're offering to help our wounded? During active combat?" The pattern repeated throughout the engagement. Human forces disabled enemy ships with precise strikes, then immediately offered medical assistance. They broadcast safe evacuation routes for civilian areas on the planet below. They even transmitted technical data to help damaged hegemony vessels stabilize their life support systems. But the most shocking moment came when the hegemony destroyer Cold Efficiency suffered a catastrophic power failure. The ship was drifting helplessly, its crew in danger from radiation leaks. Without orders, Captain Martinez broke off from combat and moved his ship into rescue position. "Hegemony vessel Cold Efficiency, this is the UEG Defender. We're reading dangerous radiation levels on your ship. Request permission to come alongside and assist with evacuation." Commander Vorth's voice was strangled. "They want to rescue our people? They're still fighting us." The human ship docked with the disabled destroyer and began evacuating hegemony personnel. Zixathara watched human medics treating injured enemies with the same care they would show their own people. Human engineers worked to stabilize the alien ship systems while their own vessels continued fighting the battle. "This is impossible," Zixathara whispered. "They cannot fight a battle and conduct rescue operations at the same time." But they were doing exactly that. The tide of battle began to shift in ways that defied all tactical analysis. Hegemony crews, having been rescued by human forces, found themselves reluctant to resume fighting. Several ships reported technical difficulties that prevented them from targeting human vessels effectively. More disturbing was the intelligence coming from the planet's surface. Human ground forces had landed and were advancing toward the main hegemony positions, but instead of the brutal assault everyone expected, they were following the same impossible patterns as the space battle. "Sir," the intelligence officer reported, "the human ground forces are, this doesn't make sense." "Report," Vorth ordered. "They're advancing through civilian areas, but they're providing food and medical aid to the local population as they go. They've set up field hospitals that are treating both human and hegemony wounded. They're even evacuating hegemony families from combat zones." Zixathara pulled up the ground combat feeds on her personal display. What she saw defied every principle of military logic she had ever learned. Human soldiers moved through the colony in small, disciplined units. When they encountered civilians, they stopped to provide assistance. When they found wounded enemies, they gave medical aid. When they captured hegemony positions, they immediately established humanitarian aid stations. But most shocking of all, it was working. Hegemony troops began surrendering in large numbers, not because they were being defeated, but because they trusted human treatment of prisoners. Civilian populations actively assisted human forces, providing intelligence and safe passage. Even hegemony command personnel found themselves cooperating with human officers. The battle that should have been a simple demonstration of hegemony superiority turned into a humiliating defeat. Not through superior firepower or tactical brilliance, but through an approach to warfare that Zixthara's mind simply could not process. "Order retreat," Commander Vorth finally commanded, his scales a defeated gray. As the hegemony forces withdrew, Captain Martinez's voice came over the communications again. "Commander Vorth, you have several damaged vessels that may not survive the journey home. We're prepared to provide escort and assistance until you reach safe harbor." Vorth stared at the communication panel in stunned silence. The humans had just defeated his forces, and now they were offering to help ensure safe passage home. "Why?" Vorth asked, his voice barely audible. "Because that's who we are," Captain Martinez replied simply. During the long journey back to hegemony space, Zixthara spent every waking moment trying to understand what she had witnessed. She analyzed the battle data repeatedly, looking for some logical explanation for human success. But the more she studied it, the more her mind reeled. The humans had won by deliberately fighting inefficiently. They had gained advantages by showing mercy to enemies. They had achieved victory by caring more about protecting life than about winning the battle. Every principle of logical warfare said this should be impossible. Yet she had seen it happen with her own eyes. Zixthara began to pace her quarters obsessively, her mind working furiously to find some flaw in the human approach. There had to be an explanation. There had to be some hidden logic that made their methods work. But deep in her analytical mind, a terrible thought was beginning to form. What if efficiency itself was not the ultimate military principle? What if logic was not the highest form of strategic thinking? What if the humans were right, and everything the Kethvar believed about warfare was wrong? The thought was so disturbing that Zixthara pushed it away, but it kept returning, growing stronger each time. Her mind, trained since birth to process information logically, was beginning to crack under the weight of an impossible contradiction. The humans had broken every rule of sensible warfare, and somehow that had made them unstoppable. It made no sense. But it was true, and that truth was slowly destroying her sanity. Zixthara had not slept properly in 6 days. Her quarters aboard the research station were littered with data tablets, holographic displays, and scattered notes written in her native script. Her normally pristine appearance had deteriorated. Her gray skin had a sickly pallor, and her large black eyes were bloodshot from staring at screens. She was obsessed. Every human military manual she could acquire, every historical document, every tactical analysis, she consumed them all with desperate hunger. The defeat at New Geneva had shattered something fundamental in her understanding of warfare, and she needed to know why. The first breakthrough came when she discovered human military training protocols. She watched hours of footage showing human soldiers in preparation for combat. What she saw should have been laughable, but instead filled her with growing dread. Human soldiers were trained not just to fight, but to make moral decisions under pressure. They practiced scenarios where they had to choose between tactical advantage and protecting civilians. They were taught to recognize surrender signals from enemies and respond appropriately. They were drilled on providing medical aid to wounded foes. They are training their soldiers to be weak, Zixthara muttered to herself. But even as she said it, she remembered the disciplined efficiency of the human forces at New Geneva. She dug deeper into human psychological warfare doctrine. What she found there broke something in her mind. Humans had weaponized their own morality. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She stumbled backward from her desk, her breath coming in short gasps. The humans weren't showing mercy despite their military effectiveness. Their mercy was their military effectiveness. She pulled up comparative studies of human conflicts throughout their history. The pattern was always the same. Forces that maintained strict ethical codes consistently outperformed those that abandoned moral constraints. Armies that protected civilians gained more intelligence and support. Military units that treated prisoners well received more surrenders and faced less desperate resistance. But the most disturbing discovery was in the psychological profiles of human soldiers. Unlike Kethvar warriors who were trained to suppress emotion and follow logical commands, human soldiers were encouraged to maintain their emotional connections and moral reasoning. This should have made them unreliable and weak. Instead, it made them unbreakable. Zixthara found records of human soldiers who had endured torture without revealing critical information, not because they feared punishment, but because they genuinely believed in the moral rightness of their cause. She found accounts of human units that had fought to the last person defending civilian populations. Not from logical military necessity, but from emotional commitment to their values. They fight harder because they care more, she whispered, the words feeling alien in her mouth. The analysis of human surrender rates was equally disturbing. Throughout their history, human forces had one of the lowest desertion rates in the galaxy. Human prisoners of war rarely changed sides even when offered significant incentives. Human soldiers showed remarkable loyalty to their units and commanders. The reason was simple and terrifying. Humans trusted their military leadership because that leadership followed the same moral codes as the soldiers themselves. When everyone from the highest general to the lowest private followed identical ethical standards, it created a unity of purpose that logic alone could never achieve. Zixathera began to pace again, her mind racing. She was beginning to understand the true horror of the human approach to warfare. They had not simply developed effective tactics, they had evolved an entirely different way of thinking about conflict itself. She pulled up the human documents, known as the Laws of Armed Conflict, and read them again, this time with her new understanding. These were not restrictions that humans followed reluctantly. They were the foundation of human military power. By limiting their own actions, humans created trust among their own forces. By protecting enemies, they encouraged surrender and reduced resistance. By caring for civilians, they gained intelligence and support. By showing mercy, they appeared strong rather than cruel. Most terrifying of all, they had made their enemies want to be conquered by them. Zixathera thought about the hegemony crews who had been rescued by human forces during the battle. Many of those soldiers had submitted reports praising human treatment. Some had even requested transfers to human-controlled territories. The humans had turned their enemies into advocates. It's psychological warfare on a species level, she breathed. She opened a new file and began typing frantically, trying to capture her understanding before it slipped away. The human approach to warfare was not about winning individual battles. It was about winning the long-term struggle for hearts and minds across entire populations. Every act of mercy was a message. You can trust us. Every protection of civilians was a statement. We are not your enemies. Every humane treatment of prisoners was a promise. Surrender is safe, but it went deeper than propaganda. The humans genuinely believed in these principles. Their soldiers were not acting. They were following their authentic moral codes. This authenticity made their approach incredibly powerful because it could not be faked or copied by species that did not truly embrace the underlying values. Zixathera realized that the Kethvar could never duplicate human methods. Their entire evolution had been based on logical efficiency and emotional suppression. They could pretend to show mercy, but it would always be calculation rather than genuine care. Enemies would sense the difference and respond accordingly. The humans had not just developed superior tactics, they had evolved into a form of life that was uniquely suited for their approach to warfare. Their emotions, their moral reasoning, their capacity for genuine empathy, these were not weaknesses to be overcome, but strengths to be leveraged. She started to understand why human soldiers fought so hard. They were not just defending territory or resources. They were defending an entire way of life, a moral universe where strength came from protecting the weak rather than exploiting them. But the final piece of the puzzle was the most disturbing. Zixathera accessed classified hegemony intelligence reports from species that had faced human military forces. The pattern was consistent across every encounter. Human forces won not through superior firepower or numbers, but through superior morale, unit cohesion, and civilian support. They gained advantages that could not be measured on traditional tactical displays. They created psychological effects that lingered long after battles ended. Most importantly, they changed the very nature of conflicts they entered. Wars against humans became different kinds of wars, fought by different rules with different objectives and different measures of success. They don't just win, Zixathera realized. They change what winning means. She sat down heavily, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. The implications were staggering. If the humans were right about warfare, then everything the hegemony believed was not just wrong, it was counterproductive. The Kethvar philosophy of logical efficiency in combat was actually making them weaker, not stronger. Their suppression of emotion was reducing their effectiveness, not improving it. Their ruthless treatment of enemies was creating more resistance, not less. Zixthera felt her worldview crumbling around her. She had spent her entire life studying warfare from the perspective of logical efficiency. She had believed that emotion was weakness, mercy was wasteful, and moral constraints were handicaps. But the humans had proven that the opposite was true. Emotion could be strength. Mercy could be tactical advantage. Moral constraints could be force multipliers. The worst part was that she could see the logic in the human approach, even as it violated every principle she had been taught. It made sense in a way that hurt her mind to contemplate. Her analytical training demanded that she accept evidence-based conclusions. The evidence was overwhelming. Human methods worked better than Kethvar methods. But accepting this evidence meant rejecting the fundamental assumptions that had shaped her entire identity. Zixthera looked at her reflection in the dark screen of a powered-down display. Her face showed signs of severe stress, twitching around her eyes, discolored patches on her skin, trembling in her hands. She was experiencing something that had no precedent in Kethvar psychology. Her logical mind was being forced to accept conclusions that contradicted its basic programming. The contradiction was creating feedback loops that her neural pathways could not process properly. For the first time in her life, Zixthera began to understand why humans spoke of things like mental anguish and existential crisis. Her mind was trying to hold two incompatible worldviews simultaneously, and the strain was becoming unbearable. She reached for another data tablet, desperate to find some flaw in the human approach that would restore her sense of logical order. But deep down, she already knew what she would find. More evidence that the humans were right. More proof that everything she had believed was wrong. And more damage to a mind that was not designed to handle such fundamental contradictions. The Hegemony Council chamber was a vast circular room with representatives from 15 different species arranged in ascending tiers. At the center stood a holographic platform where speakers could address the assembly. Zixthera stood on that platform now, but she looked nothing like the composed military strategist who had first encountered the humans months ago. Her gray skin had taken on an unhealthy mottled appearance. Her large black eyes darted constantly, unable to focus on any single point for long. Her hands shook as she gestured at the displays floating around her. Most disturbing of all, her voice carried a note of barely controlled hysteria. "Honored Council," she began, her words coming too fast. "I have completed my analysis of human military doctrine. The results are problematic. High Counselor Vextar, a massive crystalline being whose form shifted colors with his mood, flashed a skeptical amber. Explain these problems, strategist." Zixthera activated her first display. It showed tactical data from the New Geneva engagement. Observe the human combat patterns. They deliberately avoided targeting critical ship systems until after disabling weapons. They provided medical assistance to enemy forces during active combat. They announced their attack plans in advance. "We are aware of these inefficiencies," Counselor Mordek said from his position in the third tier. The insectoid being's mandibles clicked with impatience. "Your task was to explain how we could exploit such obvious weaknesses." "That's just it," Zixthera said, her voice rising. "They aren't weaknesses. They're strengths. Somehow, impossibly, their inefficiencies make them more efficient." The council chamber erupted in confused murmurs. High Counselor Vextar's crystalline form flashed red for silence. "Explain this contradiction." Zixthera touched her control pad and the display changed to show psychological warfare analysis. "The humans have weaponized compassion itself. Every act of mercy serves a tactical purpose. Every protection of civilians gains them intelligence assets. Every humane treatment of prisoners encourages future surrenders." She moved to the next display showing comparative morale statistics. "Human forces show unprecedented unit cohesion because their soldiers trust their leadership completely. This trust exists because humans impose the same moral restrictions on their officers as on their troops. No one is exempt from their rules." Counselor Zithana, a snake-like being from the fourth tier, raised her head. "You are saying they maintain discipline through self-imposed limitations rather than hierarchical control?" "Yes, but it goes deeper than discipline," Zixthera replied. Her hands were shaking more visibly now. "They've created a feedback loop where moral behavior increases military effectiveness, which reinforces the moral behavior, which increases effectiveness further." She activated another display showing battle outcome statistics. In every engagement where humans have faced overwhelming odds, They have either won or achieved strategic objectives despite tactical defeat. The key factor is not superior technology or numbers. It's superior morale and civilian support. High Counselor Vextar's form shifted to a puzzled blue. How do moral restrictions create military advantage? Because they change the nature of the conflict itself, Zixthara said, her voice becoming more strained. When humans fight, they're not just trying to destroy enemy forces. They're trying to prove that their way of life is superior. Every battle becomes a demonstration of their values. She pulled up recordings from the New Geneva engagement. Watch how the human soldiers behave. They're not just following orders. They're expressing genuine belief in their cause. This authenticity creates psychological effects that cannot be replicated through training or propaganda. The display showed human medics treating wounded hegemony soldiers. Several council members shifted uncomfortably as they watched their own people being cared for by the enemy. The humans convinced our own troops that surrender was preferable to continued resistance, Zixthara continued. Not through threats or bribery, but through demonstration of their character. They made themselves trustworthy. Counselor Mordek's mandibles clicked again. Surely this approach has exploitable weaknesses. Their concern for civilian casualties must create tactical vulnerabilities. No, Zixthara said flatly. That's what I thought initially. But human protection of civilians actually increases their tactical flexibility. Civilian populations provide intelligence, logistic support, and safe harbor. The humans gain more from civilian cooperation than they lose from protective constraints. She activated a new display showing intelligence gathering statistics. Human forces in occupied territories receive 17 times more actionable intelligence than hegemony forces. The difference is civilian cooperation rates. High Counselor Vextar's form was now a deep troubled purple. You are suggesting that mercy is strategically superior to ruthlessness? I'm not suggesting it, Zixthara said, her voice cracking slightly. I'm stating it as demonstrated fact. The humans have proven that their approach works better than ours. The council chamber fell silent. The implications of Zixthara's words were staggering. If she was correct, then the fundamental basis of hegemony military doctrine was not just flawed but actively counterproductive. There must be some limitation, Counselor Zithana said. Some situation where human methods fail. Zixthara laughed, and the sound was distinctly unhinged. That's what I thought. I spent weeks looking for examples of human defeat or failure. Do you know what I found? She activated her final display. Humans sometimes lose individual battles. They sometimes suffer casualties. But they have never lost a war when their core values were threatened. Never. Because their values give them advantages that pure logic cannot counter. Her voice was rising again, becoming more frantic. They fight harder because they believe in what they're fighting for. They maintain unit cohesion because they trust each other completely. They gain civilian support because they actually protect civilians. They receive surrenders because they actually treat prisoners well. Zixthara turned to face the council directly, her eyes wide and unfocused. Don't you understand? They've solved warfare. They've found a way to fight that makes them stronger rather than weaker, and we can't copy it because we don't believe in it. High Counselor Vextar's form flashed warning colors. Strategist, you appear to be experiencing significant stress. Perhaps you should rest before continuing this analysis. Rest? Zixthara's laugh was bitter. How can I rest when everything I've believed my entire life has been proven wrong? How can any of us rest when we've discovered that our enemies are better than us? The chamber erupted in outraged protest from various council members. But Zixthara continued, her voice becoming louder and more desperate. They're not just defeating us militarily, they're defeating us morally. Every engagement proves that their way of thinking is superior to ours. They're not conquering us through force. They're converting us through example. She gestured wildly at the displays around her. Look at the data from New Geneva. How many of our rescued personnel have requested asylum in human territory? How many have submitted reports praising human treatment? They're turning our own people against us simply by being better than us. Counselor Mordek stood up, his insectoid form radiating hostility. This is treasonous talk. You are suggesting that we should adopt inferior alien methods. Inferior. Zixthara's voice cracked completely. They work better than our methods. They produce superior results. They create stronger military forces. How are they inferior? High Counselor Vextar flashed emergency red. Security. Escort strategist Zixthara to medical evaluation. As the security guards approached, Zixthara backed toward the edge of the platform. "You don't understand," she said, her voice now barely above a whisper. "I've seen the truth. The humans haven't just found better tactics. They've found a better way to exist." Her legs gave out and she collapsed to her knees. "If mercy is strength, if compassion is power, if protecting the weak makes you invincible, then what does that make us?" The security guards reached her just as her mind finally snapped under the weight of the contradiction she could no longer bear. Her last coherent words echoed through the chamber. They showed mercy to the mind they broke with mercy itself. 3 days later, Zixthara sat in a medical facility, staring at the wall with empty eyes. The hegemony's best psychological specialists had examined her, but none could repair the damage caused by her encounter with human military philosophy. Her mind, designed for logical efficiency, had been shattered by the discovery that logic was not the highest form of strategic thinking. She muttered fragments about weaponized mercy and the strength of chains, while human doctors, following their impossible laws of war, ensured that even this broken enemy received the best possible care. Outside her window, hegemony and human officials worked together to establish new diplomatic protocols. The humans had won without firing a shot, simply by being themselves. And somewhere in her fractured consciousness, Zixthara understood that this was always how it was going to end. The humans had not conquered the hegemony through force. They had converted them through example. The last rational part of her mind whispered a final, terrible truth. Perhaps being broken by something beautiful was better than remaining whole through something ugly.